Hello and welcome to the Equestrian Mums Club podcast. We're your hosts, Katie Allen Clark and Sophie Conway, avid equestrians and recent first-time mums. Join us and a herd of other guests as we discuss the wild ride of parenthood and horse care together. Now it's time to take up the reins and walk on into our next episode.
Today we are going to talk about the ride to recovery, which is a metaphor for getting better after you have a baby.
And to get better, you kind of need to know how it starts.
Oh, God.
So, this episode, in a nutshell, will be about our birth stories, which we hope we can keep short and succinct for you.
We're going to keep it short because nobody needs to hear the ins and outs of it. Because if you're pregnant, I don't want to scare you. And if you're not pregnant and you've had a baby, you've got your own story.
But then we want to talk a little bit about how that story has led to our own recoveries.
On horses. How we've managed to get back in the saddle.
Yeah. So, Sophie, a question for you, my dear.
Go on.
A question. What did you want for Olive's birth?
I didn't know what I did want, but I knew what I didn't want.
Interesting. So, for those of you that have not yet had the privilege of giving birth, they will say to you, what is it, at 34 weeks, something like that? You do a birth plan.
Yeah.
So, what did you not want?
So I wrote a full birth plan. I spent ages on it, and it was like 10 pages long. And but at the top, because there's an NHS one that you can use, and it asks you all these questions, and so I filled them all out, and then I printed it out and I put it in an envelope with birth plan written on it, and sealed the envelope. And when I left the hospital with Olive, I took with me the sealed birth plan that nobody looked at. Had they looked at it, they would have seen at the top in red writing, "I don't want forceps."
Okay.
Lo and behold.
What did you have?
I mean, let's start from the start, because when I was pregnant, I had a few complications, minor, including fibroids, which when you're pregnant, the surge of hormones make them grow.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
So when actually really early on in pregnancy, I was really uncomfortable because when the baby was exactly the same size as the fibroid, the baby was pushing the fibroid out. And so I had like a little lump. Or actually not a little lump, it was a big lump that came out. And then as the baby grows and grows, they kind of engulf the fibroid, and the fibroid becomes less of a problem. But
did you know you had fibroids before you had Olive?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah. But they were tiny, and that could have actually been something that affected me getting pregnant for quite a long time. But yeah, they then got big when I got pregnant. And so I was worried about it, obviously being my first. But it did mean that I got lots of extra growth scans and everything else, and she was fine the whole time. But then it did sort of throw up the question of whether I should have a C-section, because fibroids can cause complications when you have giving birth. But this lovely Polish doctor, actually wasn't Polish, he had a Polish name, he was Irish, very good looking actually.
We know.
He had the Irish charm. And when I had my 38 weeks chat, or 39 week, I don't know, I was very, very late on. He convinced me that actually giving birth naturally would be the way forward, and it's better for everybody. And actually, sorry, just to mention in the middle here, I had group B strep.
Oh, did you?
Now, they don't test for that on the NHS anymore. I only knew I had it because I had very slight bleed about 20 weeks or 25 weeks maybe, and I went in and they checked then, and they said, you've got group B strep, but it can come and go. You probably won't have it when you give birth. So that was another reason that I was initially kind of opting for a C-section, and then got not talked out of it, but given the pros and cons, and I said, fine, we'll just go for a natural. But they induced me because I had a big baby. And they didn't want me to go.
How big was she?
Well, they predicted that she was going to be like 9.5 pounds. She wasn't. She was 8.8. But that's still big.
Still big, particularly when Sophie is petite.
I'm very small. Tiny weeny midget. So the actual birth, I was induced, and 6 hours after the induction, to try not to be too graphic, the induction is like a pessary that they put up. And
where do they put up, Sophie?
They put it up your vagina, Katie.
Oh, lovely.
And then it's supposed to stay up there for a while, and it didn't stay up there. It fell out. And so I was like,
very not useful, that.
No, it's not useful. And I was really angry because I was like, well, I'm in hospital now and the pessary's fallen out and I'm here to have a baby and I'm not going. I either don't want to stay here and I want to go home, or I'll stay here but you've got to put another one in. Anyway, they wouldn't do either. They said, you've just got to stay here and we're not putting another one in. But I did go into labour about half an hour later.
Which actually isn't the worst story.
So not the worst, but it was very painful. And I remember, so my waters broke, and I remember instantly I started throwing up and started to feel really fevery. And I told the midwife, this was before I had even gone into delivery, I was on the ward. Told one of the midwives, and she was like, oh yeah, that's quite normal, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, eventually I did go out onto the ward, go into delivery, sorry, out of the ward into delivery. And turns out that I had sepsis from group B strep, had gone all around my body when my waters broke, and I had a temperature of like 100 million, and they wouldn't give me an epidural even though I really wanted it because I had a really high temperature. So I can remember shouting at Alex, telling him to go and get ice for my ears to bring my temperature down. And he was like, no, Soph, I'm not doing that because you've actually still got a temperature. You can't trick them with ice in your ears. Anyway, so long story short, they eventually got my temperature down. I had an epidural, but because I had this infection, when it was time to start pushing, they couldn't let her kind of hang around in the birth canal for too long because otherwise she'd get the infection. So after lots of pushing, I then got rushed into surgery, and they did another like spinal, and then she came out with forceps. They didn't read the birth plan.
However, the NHS are brilliant, and they,
oh my goodness,
potentially saved both of your lives in that.
It was amazing. They were absolutely, honestly, like, and I actually look back, and I'm interested to hear what you think about this. I did have quite a traumatic experience. It wasn't a very nice birth, and it all in lasted, it was about 24 hours. But I look back on it and I'm like, I actually wouldn't do it differently.
Interesting.
It was a really kind of primal, weird experience that is just your experience.
It's your story, isn't it?
And it's your story, and I actually like telling the story. I don't have any like, I would do it again. What about you?
So my birth plan was very simple.
C-section.
I wanted to stay alive. That was my birth plan. Whereas, interestingly, you said you'd done a 10-page plan.
Yeah.
You're not a planner.
No, I'm not.
I am a mega planner to the nth degree. But
we've all seen your spreadsheet.
Yeah, they're pretty epic. But for this, I felt like I needed to give control to somebody else.
Yeah.
And as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I was like, I want a C-section. And I was prepared that it might not go to plan, that I might, for some reason, not end up having a C-section.
Well, also, you could give birth early.
And also, my baby was so stealthy because I didn't know he was there.
Yeah.
My birth plan, it could not have gone to plan. So yeah. I almost gave that up. But I just found that actually my delivery was really easy physically, because I'd given that control to somebody else.
Yeah.
Mentally, completely different story.
Yeah.
But physically, I'd given that my life and Rafe's life into somebody else's much more qualified hands.
Yeah.
So I I knew that decision was right for us in the moment.
Did you get and I know a lot of mums that have had this, and one of my best friends had this, guilt because she actually wanted to deliver naturally, and she ended up having an emergency C-section, so it's slightly different. But other people do have that guilt and feel like they need to defend themselves for having had a C-section. Did you get that?
I felt like in conversations before I gave birth, because I was so
With the doctors?
No,
with people?
No, with other people. Not even friends and family, because they knew not to say anything, but acquaintances or people that, because I knew I was booked in for a date to go, as opposed to he's here when he's here. People were a bit like, oh, it's a sunroof job sort of situation, and I'd kind of joke about it to make light of the situation because I was also scared shitless. But I don't know. I did feel like maybe it was a cop out to have a C-section, but also,
why is it a cop out though?
But
it's
also
your body and it's your baby.
In the same vein, I really needed that mental help and support, so that's why I chose to do it.
There is absolutely nothing wrong with having a C-section,
but
if it's the safest thing for you and your baby, and on hindsight, it is something that I probably should have done, because in the end, at the end of the day, I was put in huge risk, and so was Olive.
I had no physical reason why I should have opted for a C-section, but mentally it was the right thing.
But you don't need to now.
No, and mentally it was the right thing for me to do, and I would do it again.
Yeah,
absolutely. But one of the questions that we had for each other throughout this whole thing was, okay, but what about riding? How did your birth plan change your decision on when you would get back on?
So when I was talking about this doctor that was advising me and actually kind of changed my mind about not having a C-section, he used riding as leverage. Because in that chat with him, I said, how quickly would I be back riding after a C-section? And he said it would be an absolute minimum of 6 weeks off. And if you deliver naturally, you could be back in the saddle after 2. And that changed my entire decision. What actually happened was I ended up with a 3rd-degree tear, and I wasn't allowed on a horse or near a horse for 6 weeks anyway. And I spent a week in hospital anyway afterwards. But so it didn't make any difference in the end, but it did change my decision completely.
Whereas I think for me, I knew a C-section would technically delay whether I could get back on or not. And it nearly stopped me from going down that route. Very nearly. It was really close. But I had to prioritise what was best for myself and Rafe long term, and my mental health being the major driver of that. But also I was really aware that we'd had 6 friends in the last year that had babies, you being one of them, who hadn't had a birth go to plan.
Yeah, I don't think any. I'm pretty sure. I actually only know one person who had their baby, 2 babies actually, on their due dates, with like delivering naturally, with not a lot of outside help, and it all going perfectly to plan.
And so I was just really aware that getting back to riding after a vaginal birth might not be a given anyway.
It wasn't.
So I just thought to myself, no, I'm going to go with what I feel in my gut is the best thing to do.
And bearing in mind that I gave birth, I suppose, what you would say, well, it was a vaginal birth, wasn't particularly natural. What I was going to say is something else that I was very worried about, is infection from a C-section.
Mm.
And Alex also said, you're not the cleanest person in the world.
When your partner says to you, you're not the cleanest, and that can influence your decision.
You're not the cleanest person in the world. You always smell of horse poo, and you're out on the yard, and you will always do too much before you're supposed to. And he was very worried that it would pull the stitches, and I would get an infection because I'm covered in horse poo as well as doing too much.
very interestingly, I have had multiple infections
From the C-section
from
scar.
my C-section scar wound, but I would say that the NHS have been fantastic in reacting to them. So where we are in the world,
I know, but you don't want them.
no, but what I'm saying is they caught them so early that it was almost as if they never existed.
Yeah, okay, fine.
So you know, they're at my however many day checkups, they'd be saying, "Oh, that looks a bit red," or "Oh, that looks a bit hot," and prodding around and stuff. And so I had one course of oral antibiotics and one course of like a topical steroid cream. And it's kept it under control. But I do know of people that have had
really bad
awful infections that have gone wild, and it isn't easy to keep it clean.
That would have been me. It's not easy to keep myself clean.
Well, it's
without a scar.
It's in such a sensitive area as well.
Yeah, where you bend
and you're moving around all the time, and it's hot.
You've got a newborn baby.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that. Like, the infection was definitely a risk factor for me, and I've been through it, but thankfully it's not been awful.
Yeah.
Awful. So, yeah.
Where did you have Rafe?
The RUH in Bath.
Oh, okay. I was at Swindon. They were amazing. Like, amazing. So if there's anyone local listening...
Big props to Bath.
Big props to Swindon. They're obviously both amazing. And I think if that takes away anybody's worry,
we've both done very well. We've both done very well out of
apart from avoid the Irish doctor.
So did you feel that riding throughout your pregnancy, because we talked about this in previous episode, do you think riding throughout your pregnancy helped in the actual delivery itself?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, I was gonna say no, but when I was on the table with my legs in stirrups,
a beautiful thought,
Irish doctor was around my nether regions and Olive was on her way out and he had forceps. I couldn't really see what was going on because they had the screen up, thank God. But he was, maybe they didn't have the screen up. I don't know, I was so drugged up. But he was telling me to push and he was telling me when to push. Obviously I couldn't feel it because I had the spinal thing. But I pushed really, really hard and he was pulling with forceps and he said that that's the hardest he has ever felt anybody push with a spinal tap. And I thought, I was really proud of that, and I told my friends and they were like, "Oh, of course you push harder than anyone else." But I think that's horse riding.
And do you think that it made you more able to deal with the pain as well of labour?
No, not one bit. Like my first contraction was not in delivery, it was on the ward. And I think I'd had like 2 or 3 contractions and I walked out to the receptionist and asked her if she could give me an epidural. And she said, "No, I can't." You're not even in delivery yet and you've had 3 contractions and I think you need to man up a little bit, essentially. So no, it didn't help me deal with the pain.
Brackets, man up.
I think it helped me deal with being pregnant, like later on in pregnancy. I think it helped me deal with getting around and you're tired and you're used to pushing through that barrier because you've still got horses to muck out or you've still got a class to do or whatever. But with the actual pain, no, it did not help me. Did it help you?
Well, for me, I didn't have any pain because I didn't have...
Same, so we're both wimps.
I didn't have my waters didn't break.
Oh yeah.
So I didn't have any contractions. It's literally like going for a Google Meet invite to a meeting.
So
and you turn up and
we're not as tough as we think.
Maybe I'm not.
Maybe we're massive. Well, I knew we were both slightly wimpy when it comes to riding. So we're not.
But I didn't have pain until until far after the delivery.
Yeah. I didn't have any pain ever really afterwards even. And they give you so many drugs. So good.
I did because I'd been cut in half.
Oh yeah.
And that's one of the other things that I think actually riding hindered my labour, my delivery, because they had to cut through quite a lot of me.
Yeah.
But all in all, there was no difference in the pain.
I think something that that we should talk about, but I'm not sure if it's for this podcast or if it's a new one. But your mental health when you've had that baby, and how did you feel when you saw Leo?
Leo, that's my horse, guys. That's
Rafe.
Rafe. How did I feel when I saw
She
him?
didn't give birth to a big chestnut horse.
I didn't. I think I remembered that one. How did I feel when I'd got him on me?
Yeah, because you didn't want kids.
No, little known fact, or not so little. If people
now
know me. No, I felt so. It was so surreal, like really surreal. Because
did you have an instant bond with him?
No.
Did you not?
I felt, even throughout my like later pregnancy, I felt protective of him.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't want anything. I didn't wish him ill. But
thank goodness for that.
You know, but I didn't feel that instant like warm gush of, oh my god, he's perfect and mine forever and ever and amen. Like that just didn't.
Yeah, that didn't really happen to me either. They didn't come out looking particularly angelic.
No, they are quite ugly when
they first come out. It did. Olive obviously looked beautiful within like 10 minutes, but the first 10 minutes she was not good looking. Sorry, Olive, if you're listening to this and you're 16.
But I think mentally, it was a tough like ride. It was because of the shock of my pregnancy.
Yeah,
and then
you didn't have long to adjust.
I didn't have very long to adjust.
You didn't really want kids anyway.
No, and I do now, just in case anyone's listening.
I want him.
Just the one. It was still better than I'd imagined. I had prepared myself for the worst, I think, mentally. But then once he'd arrived, a lot of things naturally fell into place.
Yeah, they do, don't they?
Not the rush of, oh my god, I love you, but what I'm supposed to be doing. I know what I'm supposed to be doing in some weird way. It's
weird, isn't it? I remember, like the same as you, I didn't get that instant, like, it's weird. I don't know, I wouldn't even know if I did get it because I was so out of it and I'd been like in labour for about 20 hours. It was ridiculous. But I do remember that because of the infection that I had, they took her away and Alex went with her. They took her out of the room to get an IV into her of antibiotics. And I was like, oh God, and like just sort of laid back. And I was like, wow, what an experience. Then I was like, oh my God, go and get her. Like had this rush of like, ah! Like, and I tried to get off the bed with no feeling in my legs. And they had to basically tie me down. Like screaming a bit like a banshee to get my baby back. Which, thank goodness, the story about that Lindsay Letcombe hadn't broken yet, because if it had, I would have punched them all singularly in the face and gone to get her. So.
But no, that's really interesting actually. Like you obviously felt mega protective about having her next to you.
Yeah, weirdly.
I obviously couldn't move my legs either because I'd had a spinal.
Yeah, of course. But they didn't take him away.
No, but they were passing him round.
Yeah.
And Simon obviously had him for a lot longer than I actually did have him in the end because they were still attending to me.
Yeah, of course. What they were doing is stitching you up.
Yes, which was interesting. And apparently they put things up your bottom, which I didn't know until a lot later on.
They put up your bum?
Pain relief up your bottom.
But you don't feel it because you've already had the thing in your spine, I guess.
I didn't know until my health visitor told me about 3 weeks ago.
Did you ever saw a bum?
No. There you go. So
interesting.
But I didn't feel worried that anyone had hold of him. Whereas you obviously did.
I didn't. I wasn't that. It was that I just had this weird, like, instinctive, I've got to go and get her. It was like I was a bear in the wild and another daddy bear had come over to sniff my baby and I was like, gah!
Whereas I was just going with the flow, man. In terms of your physical recovery, how did you feel like that actually impacted on your mental recovery as well? Because for me, because I'd had the C-section, I obviously couldn't do that many things. Like for the first couple of days, couple of weeks, I was lifted out of bed. So that was stressful.
I was in hospital for a week after having her, and so I basically didn't leave the room for a week, and it was just me and Olive in a room. And I think, and it's a bit of an old-fashioned thing. I mean, the only reason we did that was because of the infection, but it's an old-fashioned way of doing it where, you know, our grands probably would have done that. They would have stayed in hospital for a lot longer than we would now because they had more resource, they had the beds, they would have had the help from the midwives, they would have had
And I think a lot of people
a lot more
actually,
support.
even if they weren't at hospital, would have been at home just staying in
Yeah,
one place.
with their family around them. And I think me having been in hospital for a week set us up really well to, I mean, when I left hospital, I was breastfeeding. I felt like I had a good handle on what she needed. I felt like I was starting to understand when she needed feeding, when she needed changing. Like, I felt a lot more confident going home than I cannot imagine having gone home 2 days after having her.
Whereas I had Rafe at 11 p.m. on at 11 a.m. on a Monday, and we were out at 4 p.m. the following day.
See, but some people are out the same day.
Yeah,
And
and
that's like,
and we were told for a C-section it was 24 hours minimum. You have to be under, like, being monitored. Yeah.
supervision.
But even for us, there was nothing wrong with either Rafe or I. You know, we were recovering as expected from that. So we were just so eager to get out. So eager to get
God,
out.
can you imagine how I felt after 6 days in one little room? The good thing is that, advice everyone, locals, Swindon, you can pay 250 quid for a room, and then that it doesn't matter how long you're in the room. So that 250 quid could be one night, or it could be 10 nights or 14 nights.
Little known fact, you can do that at a lot of hospitals. Simon and I wish we had done that because the first and only night that we were in the hospital, everybody else was screaming and we were very upset.
I would have lost my mind if I hadn't had that room. And I know not everybody can afford it. And you know, we can't really afford just a random 250 quid, but it was probably the best money I've ever spent in my life.
We really wish we had have done something like that because the only night we were in there, we got 20 minutes sleep.
You're knackered
because
everybody
else's baby was screaming, or we could
I
hear other people delivering.
I could not have done it. I need privacy, and like,
it really.
I can't even deal with Alex breathing next to me, let alone other babies screaming and women crying. You know, like, I just couldn't have dealt with it, which sounds really selfish, but it's true.
I think it also interrupts, depending on how big your ward is that you're on, it interrupts your own bonding in a strange way.
Yeah, it does. It must do.
Because you're being interrupted by other people as well as the midwives, who are all there to look after you, but it is quite stressful.
They're busy and they're in and out, and it's just, get the room, guys, if you can. Save the money when you're pregnant and get the room when you can, because it is so worth it.
So moving back on
to horses.
It's really, that's why we're here, isn't it? Yeah. Do you feel like horses helped in your recovery, in whatever way, in your own words?
Oscar, so if anybody's listened to our previous podcasts, you'll know that he's my soulmate, and he, because I spent a week in hospital and other people were doing him and he wasn't getting really any time spent with anybody, and then when I came out, he wasn't getting ridden, and I was, you know, popping out to see him occasionally, but when I'd been pregnant, I was spending a lot of time with him because I wasn't riding him, so I was brushing him. I used to take him out for hand grazing, etc. He actually got depressed when I had Olive, like, to the point where he was not himself at all. And it was the middle of winter, and his, you know, his coat was all fluffy and whatever else. And I think that's what spurred me on. It's like, he needs a job. He needs to do something, and my partner understands that as well, and so he was kind of spurring me on to not to rush back into riding, but to work towards it. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't a physical thing. It was, obviously I couldn't have got on when I first came out of hospital because I would have split the stitches and it would have been a nightmare. But for me, it wasn't the physical thing, it was the mental thing. I wanted to get back on. I didn't need to do anything to help my recovery apart from rest. I just needed to get back on for me mentally.
Whereas my horse is a pasture puff and would be happy to live
Yeah.
to live alone for the rest of his life without person or horse. Actually,
Oh,
he's
Lone Ranger.
yeah, he really prefers his own company. But I felt like every time I saw him, it like spurred me on to keep active. So every time I was lifting baskets of washing that I shouldn't have been doing, I was thinking to myself, this is like one step closer to getting back on, one step closer to doing stuff on the yard, because I want he was my freedom, and he was why I was really pushing myself to recover. So I didn't have the pressure of having to do yard chores or ride him because someone else was doing that for me.
Yeah.
But I wanted to feel normal.
Yeah. And actually, even just going and mucking out, I can remember was like almost like a breath of fresh air. You do slowly start to feel a bit more normal. But something that I didn't do and I wouldn't do again is rush that newborn phase, because it's like a bubble and it's the only time in your life where everybody kind of just leaves you alone to be in your bubble. Nobody expects anything from you. You don't have to go to any social engagements. Nobody's expecting you to compete or ride or do anything that that you don't want to do, or that people make excuses for you. You don't even need to make excuses, and you can just sit with your baby.
See,
And it's really nice.
I never felt like that because we were getting so many house renovations done.
I know that.
And also because we had so many different family and friends visiting from literally the day we came home.
That's
So,
nice too.
which was lovely. And actually, I wouldn't change that because my mind needed the entertainment.
Yeah.
But you're right. There is no expectation that you're going to be down on the yard the next day and mucking
No,
out.
there's not. And I think that like that's something to actually know, is that nobody. It doesn't matter if you're a 5-star rider or you're a happy hacker or you've just got a couple of field ornaments in the field. When you have a baby, you can get away with doing nothing for 2 months without guilt.
And we would encourage that.
And I would 100% encourage that. Like, just sit and let people bring you cups of tea. And also, something that I would say as well is if people come over to see you and your baby, make them do house chores and make them go muck out.
And get them to bring you dinner.
Oh my goodness. So, do you want to know the best present ever that we got when I had a baby? Was a little delivery of ready meals from my friend Katie Allen Clark.
Sounds like you're buttering.
And I have basically bought her. Oh my god, this is so bad. I can't tell this story. I bought Rafe a present, and then another friend had a baby, and I had to give it to them because I saw them first.
What a terrible friend, listeners.
Oh, her and Rafe a really nice present.
On a serious note, if you are having friends that are having babies, the best thing you can do is give them a meal. It really is.
Take them a Macca's.
Yeah, give them a meal, because one of the things about recovery that I didn't expect was that you don't have time to eat.
You don't have time.
You don't have time to drink.
You don't have time to poo.
You don't have time to do anything, and it's for you. You were breastfeeding the whole time, right?
I'm still breastfeeding.
You're still breastfeeding. I was what they call triple feeding in the hospital because I couldn't create enough supply.
Does that mean that you're feeding,
trying to breastfeed,
breastfeeding and pumping?
Yeah. So I was trying to do all of those things to create enough supply for Rafe, and really struggling.
Something that we need to talk about on another podcast is breastfeeding, because there is, I don't know if there's anybody out there that's pregnant and currently going through the NCT, or if there's anybody out there that's just had a baby and struggling. I don't know if you feel the same way, but for me, there was no information about formula. I didn't know what you're supposed to feed, the quantities, anything. And luckily for me, Olive did latch and she breastfed, and she still breastfed. But if I'd had to go onto formula, I wouldn't have known where to start.
And I had a completely opposite story. So we should definitely talk about this.
We need to talk about that.
And also how that affects your day-to-day life and what you can do with your horses.
Well, it affects your horses because you are tied to that baby for a lot more time if you're breastfeeding.
So yeah, let's talk about that another time. But one of the questions I had for you was your recovery what you expected?
No.
Why?
Because I thought I'd just have a baby and then walk back out and I'd be fine. And I was not fine. I was less than fine. I could barely walk.
Yeah.
And, oh my goodness. Right. You won't have had this experience. But somebody, a friend of mine, said to me, this was about probably a month after I'd had Olive. They said to me, have you looked down there? And I was like, no, I have not. And she said, good, don't. And I was like, okay, well, now I'm going to. It was literally like the Channel Tunnel. I was shocked to the core of myself.
The lack of core.
The lack of anything. It was just like insane. It's fine now. I'm back to normal, sort of, I think. But the scarring, the mess, everything. Best advice I can ever give you is don't ever, ever, ever look.
Meanwhile,
in
C-section land.
You're fine.
Yeah, it was. You've still got a pelvic floor.
Have you?
Yeah, absolutely.
But surely being pregnant destroys that a little bit.
I'd been doing so many exercises. I could basically do like.
I didn't really do any exercises. I wet myself 5 times when I was pregnant.
Yeah, I never had that.
Proper wet myself. Really wet myself.
For some reason, those exercises kept me in shape, and I'm so glad I did them. But my recovery, like, whereas you were shocked, I wasn't shocked by the physical. I was shocked by how frustrated I felt about being bedbound.
Yeah.
Even for a few days.
Yeah, but you're bedbound anyway when you've got a baby, really, because you are really busy tending to this baby. And you spend your whole day tending to this baby and you're really busy and you haven't got time for anything else.
You haven't done anything.
But you haven't done anything. And like, we're so used to going out and like by 9 o'clock in the morning, I've ridden 2, mucked 5 out, turned them all out, come back in, started work, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't know where the day's gone.
I think the also frustration for me was I felt so tired so quickly. So after a major surgery, which I'd never had before I had my C-section, I had never had any kind of surgery like that. I felt so tired within the blink of an eye. So I'd be absolutely fine, living my life, happy days, doing what I thought was normal. It's actually probably a bit too much myself. And then suddenly falling asleep.
Yeah,
like,
I didn't
in the middle
have
of the day.
That. But I had that when I was pregnant. Just constant. I think I had like a form of narcolepsy when I was pregnant. I actually had to a couple of times turn off a call and go and lay on the sofa and just pretend that I had to leave.
So yeah, I think recovery, yes and no. Yeah, you may find some curveballs if you're still pregnant along the way.
I think you just can't plan for this sort of thing.
And
then you know, sometimes looking at people like Ros Cantor, who was doing pose 7 weeks after she'd given birth or something ridiculous, or was it 7 months pregnant?
I can't remember.
We need to fact check this, but it's not helpful to normal people to base your pregnant life and your new motherhood on
elite riders.
Well, also not just elite riders, like super women. Yeah. Who are they?
So that kind of leads us to the final question, really, of this episode, which is getting back on.
Yeah, when did you ride? You were 6 weeks to the day, weren't you?
No, actually, I was told to wait until a minimum of 6 weeks because obviously I'd had a major abdominal surgery. Yeah. So in anticipation for that, I booked my first lesson at 12 weeks, which has just been this week, actually.
Yeah,
that's for another day. But I felt so good physically that after such a short time I was itching to get back on. So I started to walk around on Leo from 5 weeks. Not advised by the NHS or the doctors or midwives. So do what you will under your own medical advice. But I did it sort of slowly at first, walking around to start with, building up to a trot, just super aware of how my body felt. And then I was just, yeah, I was just thrilled to be back on board. But I was super aware I didn't want to rush it, because if I'd have torn anything, it'd have been another surgery. How about you?
That is quite impressive with after a C-section, because it's either impressive or silly. I don't know which one. Both, probably. Yeah. I got on 6 weeks to the day, and I was almost by 5 weeks I was like counting it down, and all the girls on the yard were a bit worried and came with me, and we all went on this little hack. And I've actually got a photo of it. It was so nice, but I did feel it. I could really feel it down there, like rising trot and everything. And I felt quite wobbly. And bless him, Oscar, whilst he didn't particularly look after me when I was pregnant, he did look after me then. I think he could tell that I was a bit all over the shop. Sort of wondering whether he had a new rider, if it was still me.
I was so excited and relieved to be back on board, but I found that I was so disappointed because I just didn't have power in my legs.
Yeah, I do remember that as well. Yeah, no power.
And
wobbly.
Leo requires a lot of power in the legs, so much so that I have now taken to riding in spurs, which I never did. But he needs extra encouragement at the moment. But yeah, it's getting back on. It's a different story for everyone. So I would, if you've just given birth and you don't think that you can get back on, don't get back on.
Yeah,
don't push it.
Wait until you're ready.
Don't push it, and
get someone else to ride your horse as well. Because if you've got a sharp one and they've not been ridden in 6 months,
that's
probably quite good advice actually, to get someone else on. But I didn't.
Did you feel tentative? Because Oscar is sharp, right?
I wouldn't say he's sharp. I'd say he's hot. Like he will dance about, and he's like busy.
He's a busy brain.
He's a busy boy, yeah. But he won't. He's not. Well, maybe he is a bit sharp. He is an ex-racehorse, but I didn't feel nervous when I first rode him, but I have since, and I think that is a story for our next podcast. Is progressing into ridden life.
Whereas I'd had other people consistently and constantly riding Leo throughout my pregnancy.
Did you? Yeah.
Because he's on, a full livery yard,
isn't he? Yeah.
And schooling livery is part of that. So I knew that literally before I got on, somebody would have put him on the walker, they'd have lunged him, and made sure that any stupidity was ironed out.
So you were essentially,
I could have been a potato. It didn't matter. It didn't matter if
I was a potato the first time I got on.
It didn't matter, because his excitableness would have
there, yeah.
It would have been taken care of if it were there.
If it were there. I think that's very sensible, Katie. I think everybody should do that. Not everybody has that opportunity to get somebody to get on them first, and so if you don't, even lunging them, I guess.
Be sensible. Be sensible. So those were our birth stories, and that's Ride to Recovery.
It's not all of our Ride to Recovery.
It's not.
We've got an awful lot more to talk about on that recovery ride.
We have. But hopefully that gives our listeners a bit of a taste of how we've got to where we've got to.
Why we're here and talking about it.
And just a bit of insight. Don't all go to plan.
Never goes to plan, I don't think.
So hopefully this episode gives you some more insight and
helped you. Something that is worth highlighting on this is that the NCT have a helpline from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and Mind is a mental health charity that you can call. Check our Facebook status page, and we'll put all the information up there. But if you're struggling, call them.
call them. And we will obviously, there is a lot more emotive topics that we could be talking about here around sort of postnatal anxiety, depression, and, you know, trauma, birth trauma. We're not talking about that here because it's our own sort of personal stories and where we've got to. But we will be digging into that a little bit further down the road. If you want to share your stories with us, obviously, please do on the socials. We would love to hear more from you and how your birth story has affected your relationship with your horse or your riding, or how you're planning for your birth. And what any questions you might have for us about sort of whether it be C-sections or forceps delivery or vaginal delivery or whatever. We'll try. We
can't promise it'll be correct, but we'll try. Or useful.
But for now, that's our Ride to Recovery episode, and we look forward to chatting to you all a bit soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode from the Equestrian Mums Club. It's been great to have you along for the ride. We've been your hosts, Katie Allen Clark and Sophie Conway. Make sure to hit the follow button to hear more from us as we dig deeper into the world of ponies and parenthood. And until next time, stay smiling, safe, and stay sane.